The air in the studio crackled with unease as the audience settled into their seats. The bright lights of Jimmy Kimmel Live cast harsh shadows, and the usual buzz of excitement felt strained, like a rope pulled too tight. Clint Eastwood sat across from the host, his weathered face set in a scowl, eyes narrowed to slits. Jimmy Kimmel, usually all grins and charm, leaned forward, his smile sharp, almost predatory. The crowd sensed something brewing, a storm waiting to break. Jimmy wasted no time. He launched into his opening, voice slick with confidence. "You know, Clint, you've been the tough guy forever, squinting through gunfights, spitting one-liners. But not everyone knows the shadows behind the star." The audience gasped, a low murmur rippling through. Clint's jaw tightened, his fingers gripping the armrests. "What the hell are you playing at, Kimmel?" he growled, voice low, dangerous. Jimmy didn't flinch. He leaned closer, eyes glinting. "Oh, come on, Clint. We're just talking. Like that old story from the 60s. The one about you and that stuntman. Things got messy, didn't they?" The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of shock and curiosity. Clint's face darkened, his voice cutting through like a blade. "You're digging in the wrong dirt, kid. Keep your mouth shut." But Jimmy pressed, on, reckless. Messy enough that folks still whisper about it. A fight, a cover-up, maybe worse. Care to clear it up for us? The accusation hung heavy, and the studio felt like it might combust. Clint leaned forward, his stare cold enough to freeze blood. "You think you can drag my name through the mud on your little show? You're a damn fool." Anger pulsed through the room, thick and suffocating. Jimmy, undeterred, jabbed again. "Fool? I'm just asking what everyone's thinking. You've got a past, Clint, and it ain't all heroic." The audience held their breath, caught between fear and fascination. Clint's hands balled into fists, knuckles white. "You've got no idea what you're talking about," he snarled. "You want to talk past? How about yours, that cheap comedy club? Hustle you crawled out of. Think I don't know?" Jimmy's smile faltered just for a second, but he recovered fast. "Nice try, old man. This ain't about me." The exchange was a knife fight, each word slicing deeper. The audience could feel the venom, the raw hostility driving every syllable. Clint's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper, but it carried a threat. "You keep pushing, Kimmel, and you'll regret it. I don't play games with punks like you." Jimmy laughed, sharp and mocking. "Regret? I'm shaking, Clint. Tell me, what's got you so scared? That we'll find out who you really are?" The crowd erupted, some cheering, others booing the noise. A chaotic roar. Clint's eyes burned with fury, but he held his ground, every inch the man who'd faced down outlaws on screen. The studio felt smaller, the walls closing in as the tension climbed. Jimmy, sensing he'd struck a nerve, leaned back, smirking. "Let's take a break, folks. When we're back, maybe Clint'll cool off. Or not." The cameras cut, but the hostility didn't. Off stage, the crew whispered, nervous, as Clint glared at Jimmy, who met his gaze with defiance. Backstage, the mood was electric, charged with the promise of more chaos. Clint stood, towering, his presence a warning. "You're walking a thin line, Kimmel," he said, voice like gravel. Jimmy shrugged, tossing back a shot of water like it was whiskey. "Keep threatening, Clint. Makes for great TV." The audience, still buzzing, could sense the fight wasn't over. Something bigger was coming, and no one could look away. The studio lights flared back on, casting a harsh glow over the simmering battlefield. The audience, still reeling from the earlier clash, leaned forward, their whispers a low hum of anticipation. Clint Eastwood sat rigid, his face carved from stone, eyes locked on Jimmy Kimmel like a predator sizing up prey. Jimmy, unfazed, adjusted his tie with a smirk, ready to plunge the knife deeper. The commercial break had done nothing to cool the fire. If anything, it had stoked it higher. Jimmy kicked off with a taunt, his voice dripping with mockery. "Welcome back, folks. Clint's still here, looking like he wants to shoot me with that famous squint. The crowd laughed nervously, but Clint didn't blink. "You're all talk, Kimmel," he spat, each word heavy with contempt. "Digging up lies to make yourself look big. Pathetic." The audience gasped, the insult landing like a punch. Jimmy's eyes narrowed, but his grin stayed sharp. "Lies? So that stuntman story's just a fairy tale? Nothing to it? Come on, Clint, give us something." The challenge hung in the air, thick with malice. Clint leaned forward, his voice a low growl that silenced the room. "You want to keep dragging up old ghosts? That stuntman was a friend, and what happened was an accident. You twisting it for your cheap show is lower than dirt." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others skeptical. Jimmy pounced, sensing weakness. "An accident, huh? Funny how accidents follow you, like that bar fight in '72, or the studio exec who vanished after crossing you. Coincidences, right?" Fury flashed across Clint's face, his hands twitching as if itching to grab something, or someone. "You're a vulture, Kimmel, picking at bones you don't understand," he snarled. "You think you can sit there, safe behind your desk, and tear me apart? I've faced worse than you and walked away." The threat was raw, unguarded, and the audience felt it in their bones. Jimmy, though, didn't back down. He leaned closer. Voice, icy. "Worse than me? Doubt it. I'm not scared of your tough guy act. Spill the truth, or I'll keep digging." The room pulsed with tension, every word a spark that could ignite the whole place. The audience was split, some cheering Jimmy's boldness, others shouting for Clint to shut him up. A woman in the front row clutched her purse, her face pale, as if she feared the men might come to blows. Clint's voice cut through the noise, cold and deliberate. "You dig any deeper, Kimmel, and you'll find trouble you can't handle. I don't warn twice." Jimmy laughed, but it was brittle, forced. "Trouble? I'm shaking in my boots, Clint. Keep dodging." "Makes you look guilty." The standoff was electric, each man refusing to yield. Backstage, the producers exchanged frantic glances, unsure whether to cut the feed or let the chaos unfold. The crowd's energy fed the fight, their shouts and gasps like fuel on a fire. Jimmy, sensing the moment, went for blood. "Let's be real, Clint. Your whole legend's built on smoke. Tough guy, sure, but what's it hiding? A coward who buries his messes?" The audience roared, the accusation too bold, too raw. Clint's chair scraped as he stood, towering over the set. The studio fell silent, every eye on him. "You call me a coward?" he said, voice deadly calm. "Say it again, Kimmel. See what happens." Jimmy froze, just for a heartbeat, then stood too, meeting Clint's gaze. "I said it," he snapped. "Prove me wrong." The crowd was on its feet, the air thick with the promise of violence. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the showdown. A hush gripped the studio, the kind that comes before a storm breaks. Clint Eastwood and Jimmy Kimmel stood face to face, inches apart, the space between them crackling with raw hostility. The audience, frozen in their seats, could barely breathe, their eyes darting between the two men. Clint's towering presence loomed like a thundercloud, while Jimmy's defiant stare burned with reckless courage. The cameras zoomed in, catching every twitch, every glint of fury. Jimmy broke the silence. First, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You gonna stand there glaring, Clint, or you gonna answer me? What's the truth about that stuntman? About all those stories you keep dodging?" The crowd leaned in, hungry for Clint's response. His lips curled into a sneer, his words slow and venomous. "You're a small man, Kimmel, chasing shadows to feel big. That stuntman's death was a tragedy, not a crime. You want to make it something else? That's on you, but you're out of your depth." The accusation landed hard, and Jimmy's face flushed with anger. "Out of my depth?" he snapped. "I'm doing my job, asking what everyone wants to know. You're the one hiding, Clint, scared the world'll see you for what you are." A fraud. The crowd gasped, the word like a slap. Clint's eyes flashed, and he took a step closer, his voice a low rumble. Call me that again, and you'll be picking your teeth off the floor. The threat was real, and the audience felt it, a chill running through the room. The tension was unbearable, the studio a pressure cooker ready to explode. Jimmy, refusing to back down, jabbed a finger at Clint. You don't scare me, old man. I've got proof, witnesses who say that stuntman's death wasn't so clean. You want me to air it? Right here, right now? The crowd erupted, some shouting for Jimmy to spill, others begging Clint to shut him up. A man in the back row stood, fists clenched, as if he might jump the stage himself. Clint's hands balled into fists, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You've got nothing but lies and a big mouth. You air anything, and I'll sue you into the ground. But Jimmy wasn't done. He turned to the audience, arms spread, playing to the crowd. You hear that, folks? He's scared. The great Clint Eastwood, shaking in his boots. The cheers and boos mingled into a deafening roar, the room a cauldron of chaos. Clint's face was a mask of rage, but he held his ground, every inch the man who'd faced down armies on screen. The producers, backstage, were in a panic, shouting into headsets, unsure how to contain the fire. The audience could feel the weight of every word, every glance, as the two men tore into each other. Jimmy, sensing he had the upper hand, pushed harder. I've got a file, Clint. Names, dates, people who saw what happened. You want me to read it, or you gonna come clean? Clint's jaw clenched, his voice ice cold. You're bluffing, and you're about to learn what happens when you cross me. The standoff was a heartbeat from violence, the air thick with the promise of a breaking point. The crowd was on edge, some whispering prayers, others gripping their seats. Clint took another step, his shadow falling over Jimmy, who stood his ground, chin up, eyes blazing. Say one more word, Kimmel, Clint growled. One more. Jimmy's lips parted, ready to fire back, when a voice from the crew shouted, Cut! The cameras stopped, but the fight didn't. The audience held its breath, knowing this was far from over. The studio was a powder keg, the silence after the crew's shout louder than any scream. Clint Eastwood and Jimmy Kimmel stood locked in their standoff, the air between them thick with unspoken threats. The audience, still reeling, watched with wide eyes, their pulses racing as the two men refused to break eye contact. The cameras were off, but the battle raged on, every second charged with the promise of a final reckoning. Jimmy's voice sliced through the quiet, low and defiant. You think you can shut me up, Clint? I'm not some nobody you can bully. I've got the truth, and I'm not afraid to use it. The crowd murmured, their loyalty split, some admiring Jimmy's nerve, others awed by Clint's unyielding presence. Clint's lips twitched, a grim smile that held no warmth. You've got nothing, Kimmel. Just a pile of rumors you're too weak to back up. Step off, or I'll make you. The challenge was a spark in dry grass, and the audience felt the heat. A woman in the third row gripped her husband's arm, whispering, He's going to hit him. Jimmy, undeterred, took a step closer, his voice rising with reckless fury. Weak? I've got letters, Clint, from people who worked with you, who saw what you did. You want me to read them to these folks? The crowd roared, some chanting Jimmy's name, others shouting for Clint to end it. The chaos was a living thing, feeding on itself. Clint's eyes narrowed, his voice a blade honed by years of battles. You read anything, and you'll wish you hadn't. I've lived through worse than your cheap shots. You're a flea, Kimmel, biting at a giant. The insult stung, and Jimmy's face twisted with rage. He turned to the audience, his arms wide, voice booming. You hear that? He's scared. The legend's crumbling, and he knows it. The cheers were deafening, but Clint didn't flinch. He stepped forward, towering over Jimmy, his presence a wall of iron. The room felt like it might collapse under the weight of their anger. Backstage, the producers were frantic, one yelling to security, another begging to restart the cameras. The audience was a sea of emotion, some on their feet, others frozen, all caught in the drama's grip. Jimmy, sensing the moment, went for the kill. "I've got one letter, Clint, from a man who says you paid him to keep quiet. Want his name?" The accusation was a thunderclap, and the crowd gasped. The air sucked from the room. Clint's hand twitched, but instead of striking, he leaned in, his voice a deadly whisper. "You're lying through your teeth. But you've made your choice. I'm done playing nice." He turned to the audience, his gaze sweeping over them, commanding silence. "You want the truth? That stuntman was my friend. He died in a fall, and I carried that pain for years. This punk's twisting it for your applause. I don't need to hide. I'm Clint Eastwood, and I face my fights head-on." The crowd erupted, a tidal wave of cheers and shouts, their respect for Clint surging. Jimmy's face fell, his bravado cracking as the audience turned. He opened his mouth, but Clint cut him off, his voice booming. "You're done, Kimmel. You wanted a fight? You lost. Sit down, or I'll make you." Jimmy hesitated, then sank into his chair, defeated, his fire snuffed out. The audience roared, their cheers a salute to Clint's triumph. As the lights dimmed, the studio buzzed with awe. Clint stood tall, unbroken, his legend brighter than ever. The crowd filed out, buzzing with the story they'd tell for years, while Jimmy stared at the floor, his gamble reduced to ashes. Clint walked off stage, head high, the victor in a war that would echo long after the cameras stopped.